There really is only one story today, and it's the impact of Donald Trump's tariff announcements. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on that with a variety of guests. But I want to begin with a couple of assumptions. Number one, tell me what your number one priority is in the world, and I mean outside of God and family. And I'll tell you how you're reacting to the tariffs. If your number one political priority in the world is that Donald Trump is an authoritarian threat to American democracy, you're overreacting. If you're an ideological free trader, you're overreacting. Markets have overreacted because traders make money on overreactions, and so they trade into the overreaction. I'm not a trader. I'm not an investor. I'm not in the least bit worried about my 401k or my investments. I'm not, because I think this is all kind of silly, what people are saying is going to happen and the predictions they're making, because they have no idea. I do know, having listened to some very traditional conservatives this morning on their podcast, some very traditional never-Trumpers online, having watched a variety of people react, that they're not being fair to Donald Trump's rollout of the new economic approach, the premise of which is trade barriers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. We have focused on trade barriers that are labeled tariffs, but there are lots of trade barriers which have grown up against the United States since the fall of the Soviet Union that we have tolerated. And he called a flag on it yesterday, and he said, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. We're going back to insisting on honest-to-goodness fair trade, not protectionist. It's not neo-protectionist. It's a demand for equity. I don't know if it's going to work. I have no idea. I have great confidence in America. I have great confidence in people coming here to build and manufacture when the advantage of doing so is very, very real. But I did hunt for explanations from the Team Trump, and the most concise one I could find is from Stephen Miller yesterday after the announcement, cut number 15.
Can you talk about the president's historical view on global trade and the tool of tariffs, or the use of tariffs, that he envisions, not just through Liberation Day today, but how he's used it over the years?
Yes. Well, the announcement today is the most significant action on global trade policy that has taken place in our lifetimes. It's not even a close call. I mean, this is probably the biggest event that's happened on global trade since the very ill-fated decision that we are now reversing of knocking down all of America's trade tariffs and revenue policies that led to the offshoring and outsourcing of all of our industries. So this is the great reversal of that great betrayal, is how I would look at it. So in the 20th century, successive American presidents knocked down all of the policies that we had to protect American industry, and they did insane things like letting China into the World Trade Organization, as an example. And we watched all of our factories go overseas. This is the complete reversal of that. This is the great onshoring, the great reshoring of American jobs and wealth. So if you look at America today, we're totally dependent on foreign countries for the supplies that make this country run, for all of the essential goods, materials, manufactured products that make it possible for us to live our lives. Our cars, our electronics, all the materials that go into our homes, our buildings, our medical supplies, our entire supply chains are completely embedded in foreign countries. So if there's a national emergency of any kind, and a country shuts off an import, or a foreign power embargoes a sea lane, we are then left defenseless, helpless, because of the decisions that prior leaders made that President Trump is now reversing to let all of these industries leave our country. And so what he's doing today is, for the first time ever, he's saying that if you have stolen our jobs and therefore threatened our national security, we will apply a reciprocal tariff based on the degree of your misconduct. So for countries like China, for example, they will see a very high tariff rate because they've engaged in the most egregious conduct that threatens our national security. For countries that have severe but not as severe misconduct, they'll see a moderate but not as high tariff rate. The effect, though, of those global tariffs will be that companies will have to move their production back into the United States. So factories will leave, whether it be Mexico or Canada or Vietnam or Cambodia or China or the European Union. They will come back to the United States to produce their products, to make their goods. And in so doing, yes, it will create jobs. Yes, it will increase revenues. But most importantly, it will restore our national security so that we will not be dependent on anyone else to survive and thrive as a nation. That's the significance we're talking about today, the most important economic event of our lifetimes.
And Stephen,
I agree with Stephen Miller. It is the most significant economic policy change of my adult life, other than the tax cuts of Reagan and the tax cuts of Donald Trump. They are the most important, and we have to get the tax cuts through rather quickly, and I hope the Senate and the House are listening, and they're moving quickly. But what Stephen Miller laid out that I think most of the commentary has missed that's negative is that the national security component of this is real. This is not post-World War II, when the United States adopted the Marshall Plan and adopted trade policies to lift up a destroyed world and to stand it on its feet to face Soviet communism. And it's not in 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when we were under the illusion that China and its allies were our friends. It's 2025. And while we remain the dominant economic player on the globe, we have to change our policies, and it may or may not involve the tariffs that were announced yesterday. I'm not an economist. I focus mostly on politics, national security, and the law. And I do not claim to know anything about economics. I am ideologically a free trader. The United States was built on free trade. The reason the Constitution was adopted, the reason it actually came into being, is that during the Continental Congress, the Articles of Confederation years, from the time of the successful British Revolution through 1789, is that there were dislocations in the new states, even though they were in a confederation, and trade barriers were popping up, and it wasn't working out the way we thought it was going to work out, and so we adopted an internal free trade zone. At that time, it was the 13 states, and then it expanded with the country. And we have complete free trade in the United States. We do have a dormant commerce clause issue. Sometimes states screw around by trying to exclude other states, and that's a very arcane area of constitutional law I'm not going to bore you with. But our model is not the world's model. The world adopted the model that the United States will subsidize us because, well, originally because we needed their alliances and we needed to protect them from the Soviet Union. And after the Soviet Union went away, we adopted free trade policies on the presumption that the end of history, that was the famous Francis Fukuyama book, that we'd reach the end of history and everyone would become a liberal democracy and everyone would embrace free trade. And we had rounds of the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. And it looked like it was going that way. But then it's changed. All right, what has changed is the rise of a predatory China. China is the greatest adversary facing the United States. It is our enemy. And they have allies in Russia, in North Korea, and especially in Iran. We are right now focusing an enormous amount of military might around Iran, and before the show could over, we might strike it. I don't know. I don't expect Donald Trump to tip his hand there. He's given them a choice. What yesterday was, the way I heard it, because I hear things through a national security lens, is pick sides. You need to trade fairly with us and be on our team, and you can be on China's team. And the big villain here in the trade wars is China. And they got hammered the most. So I was listening to the commentary pod this morning. I listened to Matt Continetti. I always do. I think Matt's very, very brilliant. Talking about the fact that we levied a big tariff on Cambodia. I've been to Cambodia. They don't actually make much. But you know the one thing they are making? The one thing I saw when I was there? The big port. You know who's building it? China. You know why China's building it? Because they want their expeditionary navy to be a global navy with bases around the world, which is exactly what the British Empire did and what America did. It's a bipolar world again. And this tariff policy is a step towards clarity on whose side are you on. And I think any of people who are using insult language and making jokes or suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, or they are simply ideologically committed to free trade, they got to understand free trade is not an end in itself. The end in itself is American strength and America's national security. I think Stephen Miller made the best case I've heard made. I'm going to talk with John Ashcroft from Ruthless right after this. Joined by John Ashbrook, one of the fellas at the Ruthless podcast. Good morning, John, or afternoon where you are. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Hugh. It's so good to see your face. I mean, it's always a treat to spend just a little time with a fellow Ohioan.
Speaking of fellow Ohioan, you know, my producer, Dwayne, broke my bobblehead doll of Tim Couch. Do you think that's bad? Do you think that's an evil omen that he broke it? He came in here and he knocked it off, and now Tim Couch is legless for the first time since 1999. What do you think?
I think that's a terrible thing to do. However, not unfamiliar for a guy like Tim Couch, who never had the sort of line protection that he always deserved.
Well said.
Well said. If he's listening in Kentucky right now, I love you, Tim, but we should have started with an offensive line. Ashbrook, I listened to Ruthless this morning, and I want to make a prediction. There's no stopping Margaret Brennan. She's winning. And so I've been following the competition very closely. I'm not surprised. I would have, if it had been in Vegas, I would have bet on her in the beginning. Why do you think she's winning?
Well, and of course, Hugh, you're talking about our 5th annual Hack Madness tournament, which brings 64 different hack journalists to determine who is the biggest liberal hack in all of media. And this year, you mentioned Margaret Brennan. She's my favorite. I just think that the body of work she's put in over the last year, from the debates, from some of these things that some of these moments she's had with J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and everybody else, it's sort of rare display of talent over time, and the audience just thinks that she's the winner, and I'm in agreement.
And I think what that reduces to, they think she is most in the tank for the Democrats. And I mean, she's gonna beat Joy Reid, who's made it to the finals. She's gonna beat Jake Tapper. She's gonna crush him, because I think normal people watched her through the entire election year and said, wow, is she in the bag for the left? And she had a presidential debate. I mean, again and again, she gets owned. But let me move on to the serious stuff. I listened to the whole program today, and I listened to commentary, National Review. I read everything I could last night, because the tariff announcement yesterday is a big deal, significant day. Mm-hmm. You guys are actually the only people who covered it fairly. Everyone else brought their ideological disposition to the table, which is, you know, I'm a Reaganite. I got his picture behind me. I'm a free trader. Mm-hmm. But I think you explained sometimes what we think is free trade is not really free trade because of currency manipulation, other trade barriers, and we're unaware of what the actual lay of the land. Are you amazed by how quick people were to just blast Trump on this?
Yeah, I really was, Hugh, because I think that you need a little bit of time to study what's actually going on, learn the facts, and then reply accordingly. And, you know, on our show, we have 4 different people, 4 different points of view, all Republicans, all conservatives, but no group of Republican or conservative buddies comes to the same conclusion on every single topic. And so we try to talk through these things. And the reality is, there is so much about trade around the world and tariffs around the world that people just do not know. Most Americans are not aware that a lot of other countries actually have tariffs against American products. And the news that people read is always skewed to one side or the other. And so I think that, you know, of course, the Trump administration has caught a little bit of heat today because of the way they presented how other countries are charging us tariffs and other non-tariff barriers to get our products to market. But the goal of what they're trying to do, I think, is right. They want to educate people that it's not just free for Americans. Everybody says free trade, and you know, there are a lot of free traders out there. There's nothing wrong with being a free trader, but I think it's important to understand that these other countries are charging Americans to be able to sell their products to market. And the other aspect of what President Trump is doing on these tariffs and with trade is using them as leverage so that the world understands that they have to answer to us. We're not just like walking around like, oh, we're your friends. We'll give you everything that you could possibly want and not expect anything in return. And using these as tools for leverage against others, whether they be friend or foe around the world, seems to be working. I mean, if you look at how Mexico sort of snapped to at the very beginning of the Trump administration 2.0 in January, you see the evidence of that. You see the evidence of that from other countries who have responded to the president in ways that they never responded to Joe Biden. And so, of course, the market has taken a hit today. The Trump administration has been very clear that there's going to be turbulence. There's going to be some difficulty out of the gate with this new trade policy, and they weren't wrong about that. But I think that what they're trying to do is refocus the world around the reality that America is here to be a leader, not just in name only.
Now, I want people to focus on, and it came up on Ruthless today, and the podcast, people should subscribe, like if you wish to opine, but mostly get smart. That's why people should listen to Ruthless. You brought up the fact that you'd worked on the Netanyahu campaign a few years ago. Mm-hmm. Bibi reacted to this by saying, we're dropping all tariffs. Israel, we're out of the tariff business. And you know what? Because they're on our side. And China is the big difference between 1991 and the era of free trade and today. China's been eating our lunch. Right. They've been doing so through intellectual property theft, through espionage, through currency manipulation. And I think the throwdown yesterday is choose a side because 1991 to 2015 was an aberration. We're back in the bipolar world, China and the United States. Do you read it at all that way?
Well, I think that I don't know how you could read it any other way, and a lot of the stories that we've read about how China is moving parts through Vietnam and moving parts through other countries in an effort to sort of get around what previous American leaders have tried to do to stop this Chinese effort to undercut what Americans have put into place. I think guys who come from Ohio have a little bit of a different point of view on trade than your typical person, because 20 years ago, you remember this, Hugh, it was Sherrod Brown who was running ads showing jobs leaving Ohio. He would have these graphics of like, something flying out of Ohio and over to China. And everybody in our state knows that our industrial base has changed from the time when you were a kid. But even
let me give you this stat. I looked it up, John. In 1964, when I'm 8 years old, Warren, Ohio had 60,000 people, and they worked in the car companies and they worked in the steel mills. Today, Warren, Ohio has 40,000 people, and a lot of them are addicted to fentanyl, and there's a crime problem. I know what deindustrialization is. It did not work out well for Warren.
No, it's terrible. And I grew up in a manufacturing family. My dad had a small company that made industrial parts, and I will tell you that you watch the news today, and there's breaking news. I don't know if you maybe already covered it on your show, but General Motors said that they're increasing their production domestically. So you are going to absolutely. Yeah, it's great news, and it's not dissimilar from what we saw during President Trump's first term, when steel mills in Minnesota and Alabama and Ohio restarted their processes because there's incentive to do it. And I think it just means the whole topic means something very different to people from Midwestern Rust Belt states like Ohio than it does to everybody else.
John, the president mentioned two things yesterday that I caught. Antibiotics. The COVID revealed that our antibiotic supply chain ran through China, which was kind of a stunner to us. And that shipbuilding, China has one shipyard, produces more ships than all the shipyards in the United States. Those are jarring statistics. And I think that's at the heart of the rebalancing you're talking about. Stephen Miller certainly made it so. Are people willing to be persuaded on this? Or does the ideology and the never Trumpism trump everything else in people's mind?
Man, the never Trumpism it's a virus. It's a disease. It is so hard for people to overcome. And it's not just affecting Democrats. It affects Republicans. They hear Trump wants to do A. Well, I'm 100% behind B, even if there's someone who had been conservative or Republican for their entire careers. It's very hard for people to get past that. But I'll tell you, Hugh, what you just talked about on antibiotics and on shipbuilding, those are two big issues that America needs to get its head around. I mean, we're the greatest nation on earth. And if we have a problem producing either one of those things, we have a real problem. There's no reason why America can't produce either of those. But what are the barriers impeding that production? A lot of it has to do with regulations. Some of it has to do with cost and labor and healthcare costs and everything, all the other inputs that go into incentivizing somebody to build a business. But over-regulation across various industries has really choked out American production. It definitely is the case in things like antibiotic manufacturing and things like shipbuilding. So the other thing that the Trump administration is doing, it didn't get as much attention yesterday as the tariffs. The other thing that they're doing is eliminating so many extraneous regulations. What Lee Zeldin is doing at the EPA.
Oh,
what
amen.
Howard Lutnick is doing. I mean, these regulations, they choke out capitalism. They choke out people's desire to build something. And so when you're choking out people in America, somebody is going to make it somewhere else in the world, and they're making it in China, where there are no regulations, where they're burning coal, where they have cheap energy. So you reduce the price of energy, you reduce the number of regulations, and all of a sudden, hey, magic, Americans are making things again. And I think that could be one of the great triumphs of this 4 years.
And I wish people would just take off their Trump hats or anti-Trump hats and wait and see what happens. It may not work. It might work. John Ashbrook, who I've kept and I'm abusing his time, you should listen to the Ruthless podcast today for the actual only balanced discussion of Liberation Day I've heard anywhere. I really have not heard it anywhere because people bring their ideological baggage to what is, in fact, a policy change. But, John, you didn't discuss this morning because you had a full plate. And, by the way, McCormick is great. McCormick is funny, by the way, and his parents watching him on C-SPAN. That's very funny. We have got at least a half dozen B-2s at Diego Garcia. We have 2 full carrier groups within striking range of Iran. We have deployed anti-missile batteries to Bahrain and, I believe, UAE, and we've sent an A-10 squadron over there. It looks like we're getting ready to pound Iran's nuclear sites into the ground or their oil. What do you make of this? What's going on?
I'll tell you, Hugh, what we have in President Trump is a 21st century version of Teddy Roosevelt. Speak softly and carry a supersonic bomb-filled stick. And what I have seen now, I am not a military expert, so I'm not going to pretend to be, but I have seen stories and pictures about American supersonic bombers moving into Diego Garcia, maybe moving close off of the coast. And what that communicates to the rest of the world is we're capable. It might not mean that we're going to do something, but it certainly demonstrates that we're capable of doing whatever is in the best interest of America. And this is a guy who is not quick to jump to war. You know, he is somebody who preaches peace over and over again, but he's also somebody not to be trifled with. And that's really what America should be as the leader of the free world. You know, we have different points of view on our show with 4 guys, different perspectives, different ideologies. But the one thing we all agree on is that America needs to come first. And America is the preeminent subject around the world, and we have to protect that. And so the president has his bully pulpit on tariffs, and he's also got his bully pulpit on defense and security issues. And I just think it is so important for Americans to demonstrate and show what can happen if you do not get in line and respect our authority. Our country is in charge, and we need to act like it. Finally, we have a president who's doing that.
That's a perfect summary. So that's my exit question to you. Donald Trump won overwhelmingly. He won all the swing states. He won the popular vote. He won decisively. Do you think the people who voted for him are getting what they asked for? Because I've heard, I think it was on an MSNBC clip last night, but Tim Walz saying to Chris Hayes, oh, they've got buyer's remorse. I don't have buyer's remorse. I'm the happiest man in the world. We got a president who acts like a president who isn't incompetent and actually impaired. Do you think the Trump coalition is happy with the first 70 days?
I do. Even if they look at their 401k this afternoon and they're like, not looking so great. They are satisfied because of one big thing. Republicans over the last 20 years have promised to do something about the border. They promised to cut government, and no Republican who's been in charge has actually followed through. President Trump is following through. I remember when I started in this business 20 years ago, we were doing events at the border to call for border security. You remember when John McCain was like, build the dang fence. You remember when every single Republican said, we need to cut government over 20 years. And until today, we did not have the dramatic reduction in border crossings and the dramatic reduction in government through DOGE that we have under President Trump. So it's a breath of fresh air. It's exactly what people were wanting. It's what they were hoping for when they heard his message, and he's delivering on it right now. 401k.
So last quick question, John. You know the Hill very well. You know politics very well. The big, beautiful bill hangs by a thread. I think Thune will get something through the Senate this week. Will the House go for it? We have to get these tax cuts in order to balance out everything. It has to pass. Do you think it will?
I think you said it, Hugh. It has to pass, and there are definitely members of the House who are uncomfortable with various aspects, but they're not the first politicians to come to Washington and find that they're in a situation where they have to accept 75 or 80% of what they want in order to get the most important things done. This president came in with a bold agenda, and he is a freight train moving through this town, and I really, really doubt that any Republican is going to get in his way.
From your lips to God's ear. John Ashbrook, one of the fellows on the Ruthless podcast. Thank you, John. Be sure to like and subscribe, not just merely to opine, but actually to be smart. I think it may be the smartest podcast available. And by that, I mean...
You're kind.
They're for pros. No, I'm not kind. I really think I heard finally today someone actually give the objective assessment of what Trump did yesterday. Everybody else is ideologically driven or driven by pro or anti-Trump bias, but Ruthless brings the heat and March Madness, Hack Madness, actually. I want to make sure you put down on your calendar May 1st and 2nd. That's when the Job Creators Network Freedom Fighters Summit happens. It's an annual event. This year it's in Savannah, Georgia. I'm going along with my old friend Bill Bennett. Mike Gallagher's going to be there. Grover Norquist is going to be there, and we'll also have Kellyanne Conway, Stephen Moore is coming. It's a group of people who've been doing this for a long time and know what we're talking about, and then some newcomers like Glenn Youngkin, Brian Kemp. A bunch of the people are actually next generation Reaganauts executing on next generation policies in their states and maybe long term in the United States Senate and beyond. We'll find out. But you can't go unless you buy a ticket. You got to buy a ticket by heading to jcn2025summit.com. Remember, now Job Creators Network is our sponsor, so you should be able to remember the first three initials, JCN, Job Creators Network, jcn2025summit.com. That's step one. You go to the website to get the ticket. Step two, if you buy a second ticket and you use the promo code SALEM, S-A-L-E-M, you'll get half off. So you and your spouse can go, not two for the price of one, but two for the price of 1.5. And that's a pretty good deal. It's a wonderful place. If you've never been to Savannah, I've only been once, actually, and I had a wonderful time. Fetching Miss Hewitt's never been there. And it's a great group of people. Portions of your gift, by the way, are tax deductible and support the Job Creators Network Foundation. And you have to consult your tax people to figure out what that is. But please, there are only 150 places left. If you want to go and you're screwing around and you're thinking, I don't know, I can't help you. I got no juice because there are only so many chairs in the room, only so many rooms in the hotel. If you want to go to jcn2025summit.com. Also want to play for you a little bit of our pal Dennis Prager. I'm going to go up to PragerU this weekend, tape a little conversation with part of their team, get an update on Dennis. But every day you can listen to Dennis on Pragertopia if you are a member like this.
One of my all-time favorite lines from the Bible. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. This is, for me personal.
All right. Dennis says, That's his personal philosophy. That's from Micah, the book of Micah. And the translation I have memorized is, what does the Lord God require of you? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Dennis's explication of that is well worth a membership in Pregotopia. So head over to that. Speaking of Micah, we had a new sponsor this week, the Israeli Ministry of Tourism. And I'm jumping up and down. Because, I'm a big supporter of Israel. They are our most important ally in the world, the equal of any ally that we have. They have stood with us. We have stood with them from the founding of the state in 1948 when Harry Truman stepped up and endorsed it, voted for it. I've been twice. I've never been long enough. When I retire, and may that be many years from now, I hope to go and spend a month, because there isn't a corner of Israel that isn't fascinating. I love every part of it. I got to tell you, I love Jerusalem the most. Walking on the temple grounds is extraordinary, but going into the tunnel on the side of the temple, I think, is probably the holiest place on the planet when you're down next to the Holy of Holies. And it's holy to every monotheistic religion. And the tunnels take you down. They're not digging a hole in the wall of the temple. By the way, the blocks of the temple are they're astonishing. I don't know how Solomon built it, right? Solomon built the second temple. Am I right about that? I'm not Mr. Bible. I'm Mr. Believer, but I'm not Mr. Bible. But it's such an extraordinary thing. You should go to the website, goisrael.com, and start making your plans. Very safe. Not safe to be in Gaza. It's not safe to be Hezbollah. It's not safe to be an enemy of Israel. It's very safe to visit Israel. Go and visit goisrael.com, brought to you by the Ministry of Tourism. When I come back, I'm going to play again the Stephen Miller explanation of the tariffs, because it's the best. Not very long. It's 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Most important thing I've heard on the tariffs. And Stephen Miller is like the Gabriel the Archangel when it comes to messaging. I mean, he comes and he says what needs to be said, and then he leaves. This is a great 3 minutes and 13 seconds. If you missed it, Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff to President Trump, gave a 3 minute and 13 second explanation of what the tariff announcement really is about yesterday. Listen to this.
Can you talk about the president's historical view on global trade and the tool of tariffs, or the use of tariffs, that he envisions, not just through Liberation Day today, but how he's used it over the years?
Yes. Well, the announcement today is the most significant action on global trade policy that has taken place in our lifetimes. It's not even a close call. I mean, this is probably the biggest event that's happened on global trade since the very ill-fated decision that we are now reversing of knocking down all of America's trade tariffs and revenue policies that led to the offshoring and outsourcing of all of our industries. So this is the great reversal of that great betrayal, is how I would look at it. So in the 20th century, successive American presidents knocked down all of the policies that we had to protect American industry, and they did insane things like letting China into the World Trade Organization, as an example. And we watched all of our factories go overseas. This is the complete reversal of that. This is the great onshoring, the great reshoring of American jobs and wealth. So if you look at America today, we're totally dependent on foreign countries for the supplies that make this country run, for all of the essential goods, materials, manufactured products that make it possible for us to live our lives. Our cars, our electronics, all the materials that go into our homes, our buildings, our medical supplies, our entire supply chains are completely embedded in foreign countries. So if there's a national emergency of any kind, and a country shuts off an import, or a foreign power embargoes a sea lane, we are then left defenseless, helpless, because of the decisions that prior leaders made that President Trump is now reversing to let all of these industries leave our country. And so what he's doing today is, for the first time ever, he's saying that if you have stolen our jobs and therefore threatened our national security, we will apply a reciprocal tariff based on the degree of your misconduct. So for countries like China, for example, they will see a very high tariff rate because they've engaged in the most egregious conduct that threatens our national security. For countries that have severe but not as severe misconduct, they'll see a moderate but not as high tariff rate. The effect, though, of those global tariffs will be that companies will have to move their production back into the United States. So factories will leave, whether it be Mexico or Canada or Vietnam or Cambodia or China or the European Union. They will come back to the United States to produce their products, to make their goods. And in so doing, yes, it will create jobs. Yes, it will increase revenues. But most importantly, it will restore our national security so that we will not be dependent on anyone else to survive and thrive as a nation. That's the significance we're talking about today, the most important economic event of our lifetimes.
And Stephen,
That is the best explanation in 3 minutes of what Donald Trump's thinking is, and Stephen Miller is in a position to know it. Stay tuned. I got some great guests coming up next hour, including Senator Tom Cotton, as we talk about the accumulation of American military in and around Iran and why. Coming up a little bit later in the hour, Senator Tom Cotton is going to join me as forces gather around the Islamic Republic of Iran and prepare for a confrontation. I want to begin the hour, though, by telling you about David Boiem. David Boiem should be a middle-aged man rooting for the Bears in Chicago, but he isn't. He was murdered by Hamas in 1996 on the streets of Israel, and his family has been seeking justice ever since. Their lawyer, Dan Schlesinger, joins me now. Hello, Dan. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Hugh. Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk first about the facts of what Hamas did to David before we move on to the legal theory that is now being advanced with the assistance of Team Trump.
Yeah, well, David was a 17-year-old high school student going to a school outside Jerusalem in Israel. His family had moved from the United States. He was still a United States citizen, had moved to Israel, and he was going to school there. A couple of Hamas operatives went out on a mission. Their first goal was to attack an Israeli army base. These two guys drove by the army base, recognized that that was probably not going to be a thing that they wanted to do. Instead, they looked for a different target. They saw young David standing at a bus stop waiting for a bus to take him home, and drove by and shot him in the head and killed him. Tragic event back in 1996.
So, Dan, I'm pretty familiar with the Alien Tort Claim Statute because I clerked on the D.C. Circuit and we did the Hannock-Tellerren case. And so I know how hard it is for non-American nationals to seek tort judgments in the United States. But you successfully sought a judgment against Hamas-aligned organizations, but then they dissolved. Can you collapse the case and tell people what happened thus far?
Yeah, well, we sued under another statute related to the one you mentioned called the Anti-Terrorism Act, and we established new law. We had a difficult time getting through, but eventually we established that under the Anti-Terrorism Act, you can sue in federal courts in the United States not only the terrorists who inflict bodily harm or death on American nationals, but you can also sue anyone who provides material support to those terrorists. So what we were able to prove in the first Boiem case that was filed back in 2000, we got a judgment in 2004 finding, a jury finding that an organization called the Islamic Association for Palestine, IAP, was providing material support to Hamas and therefore was as liable as Hamas for the murder of David Boiem. And we secured a judgment for $156 million against this organization, IAP. That was affirmed in 2008 by the Court of Appeals here in Chicago. And then, probably predictably, what happened was IAP essentially just stopped doing business and never paid the judgment. So we thought we might be done at that point. But what we recognized later on was that a new organization had been formed with essentially the same leadership, the same methods of operation, the same mission, the same speakers, the same donors. And this new group was called the American Muslims for Palestine, AMP. So what we alleged in a new suit that we filed was that AMP the legal term is alter ego, as you'll appreciate, Hugh. that AMP was the alter ego of IAP and therefore was responsible for the judgment. And the point we were making that the Court of Appeals has again endorsed is if it's as easy to avoid or evade liability under the Anti-Terrorism Act as just stopping doing business, moving down the street, changing your name, then you've actually taken the teeth out of that statute and you've made it meaningless. And it's essential that we be able to enforce this against AMP. So that's where we are. We're close to the end of our case against AMP. What's made it, I think, more newsworthy lately is AMP, in addition to being, as we allege, the alter ego of IAP, is also basically the chief sponsor and coordinator of the activities of another organization called SJP, the Students for Justice in Palestine. And as I'm sure many of your viewers, listeners will understand, SJP is the organization that's responsible for a lot of the horrific activity that's been going on our college campuses in the last year and a half since October 7th of 2023.
You know, trying to get a hold of SJP and who they are, that's a very difficult legal proposition because they're a very amorphous, unorganized, but very well-funded group of affiliates. What I want to know, Dan, have you joined, for example, Columbia University, which aids and abets Students for Justice in Palestine in ways? I mean, can you join everyone who's involved in supporting Hamas, which is a terrorist organization? Everyone can agree on that. Can you join the people who are providing aid and comfort to this organization?
They don't belong in our suit because our suit is premised essentially entirely on this alter ego theory. But there are other lawsuits, and we are coordinating with the lawyers who are bringing these other lawsuits, and they are doing exactly what you suggest. They're trying to go after everybody who's providing material support to Hamas, and that includes a lot of defendants who have inflicted an awful lot of harm on many innocent people.
Now, if you win, this will change, this will materially impact terrorists and their organization and their front groups. Andy McCarthy's coming up a little bit later. We've talked about this for years. Where are you now, and what is the DOJ doing to help or hinder you?
Well, since the Trump administration began its campaign against the anti-Semitism and the support for terror on college campuses, we've been working more and more with governmental entities. It began with the Attorney General in Virginia. Our defendant, AMP, was headquartered here in Chicago. They've moved to suburban Washington, to Virginia, and they are incorporated under Virginia statutes. And the Attorney General in Virginia, based on the information that we've uncovered in our lawsuit, began investigating AMP, its lack of proper respect for corporate formalities, its tax status, and that in turn has now spread to several congressional committees that are investigating the same thing. And we are happy to share as much information as we can. We have some confidentiality restraints, but we are working with those congressional committees to make sure that they understand who AMP is, what their support is for SJP, and how all this has unfolded in the last year and a half.
I hope you pass on to the Boyums. I think they're heroes. A lot of families would have grieved quietly and not done this, but what they're doing may prevent future massacres, may prevent another 10/7. Here's the big question. Did the assets move too quickly to catch? This is the problem with bad guys and modern financial cyber transaction. They can dissolve and reform. It's sort of like a supervillain in a Marvel comic.
It is the big challenge we've got. We have a $156 million judgment that we're trying to collect against AMP. When we get a judgment and they appeal it and it gets affirmed, the assets, I'm sure, will have disappeared. But it's part of the fight that I think anybody who feels strongly about terrorism, and the enactment of the Anti-Terrorism Act, I think, reflects the view of the American public, regardless of what maybe some of the mainstream news media may want to portray. The American public is pretty firmly opposed to terror, to organizations like Hamas. And the more we can put pressure on them, the more we can make them have to defend themselves. I think we all play our own little part in trying to combat the terror that's that's already plaguing Israel and other parts of the world, and as our government has recognized, is a real threat to the United States. So we all have to keep up the fight. And I agree
Dan,
with you.
last question. There's a lot of dark money behind this web of groups that are fronting for Hamas. Some of them are not even aware what they're supporting. Have you had conversations with the philanthropies, alleged philanthropies that are supplying money? I mean, these tents don't come from anywhere. These protests are not cost free. Someone is supporting them. Are you looking for them?
We are. We've had discussions. We've had formal legal service on some of the organizations you're talking about. They all consistently deny any involvement in that, any financing of these organizations. So we don't have the power. We haven't had the ability to go after the bank records, the other financial records, the cyber transactions that I'm hoping that the government does have greater capacity to pursue.
And Dan, how long have you been doing this? I mean, I'm 69. You've been at this for how long? I just want to thank you for being a lawyer.
No, I'm 70, and I've been practicing law for nearly 50 years. But I've been, this Boehm case was initially filed in 2000, and so it's been hanging around for 25 years in one form or another. And I agree with you in commending the Boehms for their staunch support of this case and their recognition that we need to do this to combat terror.
I thank them, and I thank you, Dan Schlesinger. Thank you for your effort. I am pleased to be joined by the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the conference chair of the Republicans, and the senior senator, maybe not the senior senator, I'm not sure, from Arkansas. He's the senator from Arkansas. He is sadly a Red Sox fan, but other than that, we like Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton, welcome. I want to begin by asking you about a column I wrote for Fox News today, all open source stuff. We've got 6 B-2s at Diego Garcia at least. We've got 2 carrier groups within striking distance of Iran. We've deployed missile defense to Bahrain and other places. We've sent some A-10s over there. I have never seen this kind of an accumulation of force around Iran except for Operation Desert Storm, and that wasn't aimed at Iran. Have you? Is this unique in your experience?
Well, Hugh, you're right about everything you just cited. That's all open source information, and I believe the White House has acknowledged it's specifically in the region to support our strikes against outlaw rebels in Yemen, who are simply another terrorist proxy of Iran, and to deter Iran and to continue what the president calls the maximum pressure campaign. This is all very transparent from President Trump. He's been very clear. He said it repeatedly. We cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And he's further said that there are 2 means to achieve that goal, and he's open to either means. He prefers a deal like Libya cut with the United States in 2003, but if there's no deal, there will be bombing. I think that's an exact quote, there will be bombing. But his main objective, which is, of course, mine and the objective of every sensible American and someone who wants peace and stability in the world, is that we cannot let crazed ayatollahs in Iran have nuclear weapons.
Now, I remember Libya. Many people won't, but Colonel Gaddafi denuclearized and got rid of his WMD and everything else because he saw the invasion of Iraq. He said, not me. There was also South Africa and Ukraine. They denuclearized. It's possible to do so. It's got to be verified. What kind of steps would you expect Iran to take? Because thus far, all they've done, according to the Institute of Study of War, is yell at us and say they're going for the nukes.
Well, I think the Ayatollahs are scared almost to death of Donald Trump. After all, they tried to assassinate him throughout the campaign last year because they feared him returning to office. They knew that they had played Barack Obama and Joe Biden like a fiddle. They figured they could do the same with Kamala Harris. But President Trump, as he did in 2020 when he killed Qasem Soleimani, their terrorist mastermind, would not be played as a dupe the way Democrats have been now for decades. Again, he was perfectly clear in his first term. He's perfectly clear now. We will not allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. The difference now is, unfortunately, is that they are much, much closer. Months, maybe just weeks away from having enough enriched uranium for at least a testable nuclear device, if not a workable one. And their missile program is far advanced since Donald Trump was in office the first time. Obviously, they have missiles that can range Israel or our Arab friends in the world, but Hugh, they're fewer than 5 years, maybe fewer than 3 years away from having missiles that can range the continental United States itself. So this is not just a problem for our friends in the Middle East. This is a direct threat to the United States. That's why the president and I take it so seriously.
Now, Senator Cotton, I don't know if it's open source, but can you tell me how many sites are believed to be part of the critical infrastructure of the Iranian nuclear program? I know about a couple of them buried deep in a mountain. I assume we have the ordinance to take those out, but I don't know how many sites we're talking about here.
Hugh, it might be open source, but if it is, I'll let you and your listeners find it out.
Ha!
Sometimes when you're in my position on the Intelligence Committee, you can't remember what you heard in
That's
a classified
smart.
setting or what you read in an unclassified setting. Obviously, the United States military, and especially the United States military in concert or with the support of our friends in the Middle East, has the power to devastate Iran's nuclear sites and their military. Israel, for that matter, devastated Iran's air and missile defenses last October. And remember, this is after we had been warned for years, how ferocious Iran's home defenses were, and also how dangerous their so-called asymmetrical terrorist threat was. And what has Israel done over the last year? It's not only neutered those so-called home defenses, but has also destroyed Hezbollah and Hamas's ability to continue striking into Israel itself. And that's what we're in the process of doing to these rebels in Yemen. So all of Iran's defenses, all of its strategic deterrent, especially Hezbollah, have been totally devastated over the last year. So we not only face a moment of maximum peril because of the short timeline to break out, but also maximum opportunity because Iran right now is as weak as it has been since the end of the Iran-Iraq War in 1988, which, by the way, Hugh, I will remind your listeners, came to an end in no small part because Ronald Reagan sank half of Iran's navy, and the Ayatollahs were afraid what would come next.
Now, Senator, I want to finish by asking you, many years ago down at Camp Pendleton, a Marine Corps colonel told me, I wish you civilians would think about second-order consequences. You're not a civilian. You're actually a vet, and you know what you're talking about, given what you are. Do we have a good grip on what Iran might try in response to a devastating bomb? Do they have cyber capabilities, terrorism in the United States? Do we have a good grip on that?
Well, Hugh, we've known that for years their plan was to unleash Hezbollah against Israel. That's not going to happen anymore because Israel has destroyed most of Hezbollah's war-making capability and its leadership. I don't even know who's in charge of Hezbollah these days. Whoever it is wasn't important enough to have a beeper 6 months ago. But also, of course, they have other terrorist threats. So you could expect to see attacks on American and Israeli interests around the world. You might see some strikes against American positions in the Middle East. But I would remind you in another trip down memory lane of a moment in December of 2020 when there were serious reports of an imminent attack by Iran's proxies on American soldiers in the region. And Donald Trump tweeted out some friendly health advice to the Ayatollahs. If the hair of a single American is harmed, he will hold Iran personally accountable. So I do believe that Iran, like I said, is nearly scared to death of what Donald Trump might do to them if they were to strike out against American citizens or our interests in the region.
All right, Senator, last question. I want you to put on your chair the Republican Senate conference hat on. I talked to the leader, Thune, yesterday. Are the Republicans going to pass a budget reconciliation bill this week in the Senate and send it to the House?
Yes, Hugh, I anticipate that we will pass that budget sometime in the next 2 or 3 days. That is the budget. That's the next step for us to, as you say, send it to the House for the House to pass, and that moves us on to passing the actual legislation that is going to cut taxes for Americans. It's going to rebuild our military, secure our border, help unleash more American energy production, making sure that we deliver on our campaign promises of keeping the American people safe and prosperous.
Do you expect it to get through the House, Senator?
Yes, I do, Hugh.
Thank you so much. You made my day. I wish everyone in the country would hear that, and I hope that every member of the House of Representatives hears that as well. We need that bill. We need the Senate bill because they actually understand the bird rule. Senator Tom Cotton, thank you for joining me. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming back with Jonathan Williams, President and Chief Economist of the American Legislative Exchange Council, because we got lots to talk about in the States as well. Don't go anywhere. except over to my YouTube channel. I'd like you to like and subscribe to it because we're going to put up our interview with Senator Cotton, my interview with John Ashbrook earlier today. John Ashbrook, not John Ashcroft. John Ashcroft, great American. John Ashbrook is one of the fellows and also a great American. But it's all at my YouTube channel, which you should like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the important interviews on the Hugh Hewitt Show. My favorite segment of the week, the State of the State segment. Jonathan Williams is the president and chief economist at the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC.org, ALEC.org/Hugh. Jonathan, I love compare and contrast. That's why I like rich states, poor states so much. You have just released at ALEC the 4th Annual Energy Affordability Report. I'm kind of afraid to look because I'm in California. But I don't think California does very well on the affordability of energy index, does it?
No surprises there, Hugh. You won't like what you're paying, and if you're a Californian and listening to this, it's a great way though to rank the states, as you point out. This is one of the great things ALEC does every single year is give you a way as a state to benchmark yourself. And as you talk to your policymakers, and we work with over 2,000 of them at ALEC to be able to say, how can we make our state better off? In the case of the new report, it's about how do we make our energy mix more affordable for both residential and business consumers across the United States. As we know, it's a huge input, not just for, heating our homes in the winter and the cost to our pocketbook as individuals, but it's a huge input to the cost of doing business in a state. So in a way, you mentioned rich states, poor states there, Hugh, we could really almost include this as a variable in some of the upcoming editions of rich states, poor states, because it's that key to why some businesses choose some states over others is that reliable, affordable energy mix.
The more of these that you do, Jonathan, whether it's energy or house insurance or liability insurance, or anything, people care about the cost of living. They really want to know if they're going to move or retire somewhere, where do I want to go? And if you're going to open up a business, where do I open up the business? So who does best? Let's talk about the winners. Who produces the most energy at the least cost for the people and businesses who live there?
So the honors for that go to the great state of Wyoming. I was just talking to the new Speaker of the House, Chip Neiman, yesterday on the phone. He's been doing a great job moving a freedom, pro-taxpayer-oriented agenda this last session in Wyoming. But Wyoming is the lowest cost in terms of the electricity piece. That's probably not a surprise to a lot of folks either. And, you get, in a way, a bit of a regional feel to the states that are lowest of the costs on electricity. You have North Dakota, Idaho, and Utah following Wyoming, and then Nebraska from there. So you really have a regional piece that makes a lot of sense. And, why is that the case?
I got to say, our friend CJ Box lives in Wyoming. He's going to be insufferable now. I mean, really insufferable. So I wish you hadn't said Wyoming, because he's just already, Wyoming is best in everything, but they are the cheapest when it comes to energy.
They are. And, of course, not to add to the bandwagon there, Hugh, but I mean, Wyoming not being an income tax state is another key element. We're big fans of what's going on in Wyoming is I think we've talked about they also become a universal school choice state this year because of the leadership of Speaker Neiman and Senate leaders.
Jonathan, if you're going to open a business, I'd look for energy, water, and a school choice system. I'd also look at the tax rate because you want to attract the best employees, right? And employees are smart. Do you expect a lot of, are you adding more variables into rich states, poor states, which ought to be like the Bible for people who are choosing to locate businesses or lives?
Well, and that's something we've talked about, and energy costs and education freedom would be the logical two others. I mean, as you know, Hugh, the three big priorities from ALEC perspective, from a policy piece, is economic opportunity, energy independence, and education freedom. And so including those together in that mix for attracting, what does it mean to bring a business to your state? Or as Americans vote with their feet, as we chronicle every single year, where are they going? They're looking for the best quality of life at the lowest cost of living. And those are all key elements to it. And so that's something I know we'll be talking with Dr. Laffer and Steve Moore about as we look forward to future editions of Rich States, Poor States, because you can't escape it. When you look at what states are offering for families, you put together school choice and allowing dollars to follow families to those states of their choice when they're deciding to move. You combine that with good tax policy and lower energy costs. That right there is the combination that's the magic sauce.
Yeah, the lower energy cost, because I spend a lot of time in Maine. It's very expensive to live in the Northeast because they haven't updated their grid. Jonathan, let's get a quick update. Who's winning the tax rate race in the Southeast? Because they're all competing with each other. Who's winning?
Well, that Southeast is a competitive conference. So it's not just football, though. It's economics, right? We all know Florida and Texas and Tennessee have been zero income tax states. It's been big drivers for the region. But as last time we talked, they hadn't signed it into law, Hugh, but now he has. Governor Tate Reeves in Mississippi. Mississippi now has eliminated their personal income tax, the first state to do so if the phase-ins go as we expect under the triggers in over 40 years. So a huge, huge boost to a state that's been a slow growth state and desperately needs to compete.
Congratulations to Mississippi, and thank you, Jonathan, for all of this stuff. Get the weekly update from ALEC by going to alec.org/Hugh. That's ALEC.org/Hugh. Interesting stuff going on in the states. And they should drive policy at the Congress, and they do drive policy at the Congress, because what works in the laboratories of the state ought to be reproduced nationally. Joined by Josh Kraushaar, he's editor-in-chief of Jewish Insider. Josh, I have noticed because of the tariffs, because of the market turmoil, because of everything going on, no one is paying much attention to what's going on in Gaza. And in fact, you have to hunt for details about what is an IDF offensive. Do you want to fill people in on what the IDF is doing in Gaza right now?
Yeah, well, you're seeing as we... Can you hear me, Hugh?
Yes. We can hear you, Josh.
Okay. So the military operation that we heard at the end of the first phase, when that things fell apart, the Israelis are back in. The IDF is back in Gaza, and they're trying to oust Hamas, as we've been discussing on the show.
Now, one of the things I've noticed is they want to establish a new corridor, not the Philadelphia, not the other one, but a Morag corridor. What is that? Where's that running to, and what is it supposed to accomplish?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Josh. We see you. We hear you. You're fine. Don't know what's going on. We hear you, Josh. Now he's gone away. He's freezing. It's called a bandwidth problem at the other end. As far as I can tell, nobody quite realizes that the Israeli Defense Forces have sent at least 2 divisions into Gaza in the last 3 days, and that the combat is back at the level. This is as best as I can tell. It's just not covered anywhere, so I was hoping Josh was able to do that for us, and maybe we'll reconnect with him. I think it marks the beginning of the end of Hamas. I think it marks that Defense Minister Katz, Prime Minister Netanyahu have decided the only way to get the hostages back, and there are at least 23 of them that are alive, is to push Hamas back to the wall. And they're going to go at it, and they're going to push as hard as possible. While we're waiting for Josh, let me do the market update brought to you by American Federal. I checked during the break. It was a rough day on the market. There's no getting around it. Gold, by the way, which American Federal buys and sells for you, is at $3,131. So if you want to buy gold today, 1-800-221-7694. That's 1-800-221-7694. Or go to AmericanFederal.com. The market report is very bad. If you're a trader, I'm not a trader, so I don't really care. It'll go back up. The Dow went down almost 4%. The S&P went down almost 5%, and the NASDAQ went down almost 6%. So don't look at your 401ks today. I have told my kids for 20 years, you're going to have at least 4 or 5 terrible weeks in the market. But you're an investor. You're not a trader. If you're a trader, you probably had a really bad day unless you were short. And I don't believe in trading because there are smarter people out there. I do believe in investing. One of the things I invest in is gold. Every year, same month, buy some gold. Put it away in the safety deposit box. Forget about it. I also believe in mutual funds because I'm not smarter than stock traders. I used to have one stock, Palantir. Before that, I had Apple. For a while, I had Amazon, just because it was fun. Now I don't mess around with any of that stuff. It's just become far too complex for people to try and keep up with the professionals who are using now AI-assisted trading. Now, AI-assisted trading also means bigger swings, and when there's uncertainty in the market, and people really don't know how these tariff policies are going to work out, whether they're going to be great or not, and they really need to know about the tax bill. But so it was a bad day in the market. Not for gold. Gold didn't go down 4, 5, or 6%. Gold went down 1%. Why? Because gold is stable. Gold is reliable. Gold has marched north for a long time, so some people took some profits off the table, obviously, today. I think in order to put them into the market tomorrow, they were waiting for the market panic, and day traders and people who are afraid of 2008 happening again, or 1991 happening again, or the financial crisis happening again. Nah, that's not what this is. It's uncertainty. It'll be fine. But if you want to buy some gold, or you want to sell some gold, do it with my friend Nick Rovich and his team at AmericanFederal.com. 1-800-221-7694. The reason I like them, the reason I respect them, is they're transparent, they're honest, they've been at it for 40 plus years, and Nick knows more about precious metals and the other side. If you're part of that 2% of America that are coin collectors, this is like nirvana for you. That's not me. I don't do that. Not my hobby, not my business. I don't do that. Nick loves it. Loved it since he was a kid. That's why I got into the business. The reason people buy gold is they diversify. Same reason they buy dirt, gold, stocks and bonds, cash. That's the classic diversified portfolio. Don't go overboard on anything. Don't go underboard on everything. Make sure that you're diversified. That's the only investment advice I give you. I do tell you, I don't think inflation's a problem right now, but inflation was a great problem during the Biden years. It's going to be a problem again when the Democrats get the House, if they get the House in 2026. And what you want to do is have gold, because for the past 100 years, gold more than kept pace with inflation. That's the great inflation hedge, is gold. Since we've given up on Josh, let me go back and play for you a little bit of J.D. Vance. Actually, let me play with you Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, on Fox Business with Larry Kudlow, cut number 1.
The Republicans in the House and Senate are completely united on this mission. We must accomplish the mission, Larry, because the big, beautiful bill is going to get the economy rocket-fueled again. I mean, this is how we're going to get the economy going. It's going to settle the bond markets and the stock market, I believe, because it will show that Congress is serious about reducing debt and the deficits. But also, the reason it'll be rocket fuel to the economy is because all the elements of it. We're going to do American energy dominance again. We're going to secure the border and do those basic things we promised on the campaign trail. But also, we're going to ensure we don't have the largest tax increase in U.S. history. And allowing job creators and entrepreneurs and risk takers and companies to know what their tax rate is going forward is a really important part of that.
This is the most important thing that's been said today. Yeah, bad day on the market if you're a short-term investor. I'm sorry. I think it's crazy what you do anyway if you're a day trader, because you're not smarter than the market. However, what Mike Johnson just said there is the most important thing, which is we got to get the tax rates settled, fixed into law. We got to get the defense rebuild going. We've got to make sure we have energy dominance, and we have to have a border that is secure in the way that Donald Trump can do by deploying the military, but the wall will do much more effectively. The visible manifestation of an inward resolve to protect our borders against people who are not invited to enter the United States. Bravo, Speaker Johnson. When we come back, I've also got Tim Sheehy from Montana talking about the tariffs. I got a lot. Don't go anywhere, but do go over to Hugh Hewitt at YouTube. Just Google that, Hugh Hewitt and YouTube. And also visit iTunes or Spotify or the Salem Podcast Network and like and follow Highly Concentrated Hugh and Dwayne's World, because we give you all the news, not just a blinkered ideological view of it. We give it to you all at Highly Concentrated Hugh. What I left out in my market report, which matters a lot to people who want to buy a house or refinance a house or have to move, is the 10-year Treasury. The 10-year Treasury is at 4.03. So it has been, that's a little bit up over yesterday, but it's been going down, down, down. And that means, I think, that almost everyone with decent credit can get a 30-year fixed rate in the mid to low sixes. It was up in the sevens for most of the last 4 years. It got as high as 8. It's been coming down steadily since the election of Donald Trump in November. It will continue to fall. That doesn't mean you shouldn't buy now because you anticipate it falling. It means you should get started now, lock in the rate, and then refinance when it drops enough that it makes sense, which will be soon. That's why you go to andrewandtodd.com. They are lenders. They're Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They've been my sponsor for probably a decade. Andrew and Todd did my mortgage when we moved back to the Beltway in 2016. And I cannot recommend them highly enough for their integrity, for their kindness, for their transparency. But most of all, they're efficient, they're effective, and they get it done because they underwrite the loan. So you're not dealing with a middle person. You're not dealing with a broker. You're dealing with a bank, Sierra Pacific Mortgage. And you're dealing with Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian, andrewandtodd.com. I've known Andrew for 20 plus years. He's a dear friend. I know where his son is. I know what his son is doing. We spent more time talking this week about where his young son is and the great profession he's pursuing than we did about mortgage rates, because that's what always happens when I talk to Andrew. Probably will happen with you too. I haven't talked to Todd in a while. I always call up Andrew and say, what's going on? Phones are ringing off the hook because people are moving. The housing market is opening up. Things are starting to happen. Don't wait. All right, don't wait. Call Andrew and Todd right now, 888-888-1172. The spring home buying season is here where people move. They get in the new school district and they start looking right now. Houses are going to come on the market right now. And when one comes on, you want to jump on it. So head over to andrewandtodd.com, 888-888-1172, and get pre-qualified. Markets had a bad day today. Don't worry about that. Markets go up, markets go down. Don't sell. Don't do panic selling. Please don't do that. I had friends in 2008 that did that. The market recovers very quickly. We'll get the first steps of recovery when the House gets its act together and passes, the Senate gets its act together, passes the budget, and the House quickly confirms it, that the tax cuts will be made permanent. We will go for energy superiority, and we will rebuild our nation's defenses and build a wall at the border. That's the key parts of the Trump agenda. The tariffs and the trade policy that was announced yesterday, I don't know how it's going to work out. You don't know how it's going to work out. But here's my perspective on it. Tell me what you think happened after the Soviet Union fell, and I'll tell you whether or not you have a good worldview or not. What happened after the Soviet Union fell apart is a lot of people in both parties assumed we are on the road to Oz, and everything was going to be great, and the world was just going to simply, we were at the end of history. Francis Fukuyama, famous book, The End of History. Everything was going to work out. Soviet Union was gone, freedom would spread everywhere, free trade would spread everywhere, everything was going to be great. That was wrong. Not only is there always going to be evil in the world and mischievous and bad people in the world, there are going to be bad nation-state actors. The worst of the nation-state actors is the People's Republic of China, because it is communist through and through, and it is Leninist through and through. But they fooled me, and they fooled a lot of you. They fooled a bunch of presidents, including including Obama. They did not fool Trump. Trump began to bring the hammer down on China 2015. Campaign he promised to, he implemented it in 2017 when he became president, and it was, this is China, they're not our friends. And we should not be manufacturing essential goods and services in China or anywhere in the world. And he also began to say to the world, choose a side, because we're back in a Cold War, Cold War II. We don't want it to be a hot war. President Trump is not a warmonger. He doesn't want to go off on foreign adventures. But national security comes first. National security cannot allow what we need to be manufactured to survive as a nation in difficult times to be manufactured in China. And we learned that during COVID. Now, China is responsible for COVID. We will never know whether it was negligence or absolutely gross negligence or stupidity or whatever, but it came out of a lab in Wuhan and it killed millions of people worldwide, including 1 million Americans, and it shut the world economy down. And then we made it worse by overreacting and underreacting. Overreacting, keeping kids out of school for 2 years. Underreacting, not protecting the elderly who had underlying conditions. But we were hit bad by that. Also cost Donald Trump re-election, because if you remember January and February 2020, unemployment was below 3% or around 3% interest rates. You could buy a house for 3.5%, 30. It was the best of times, and it was the best of times. And then COVID arrived and things went south. But it revealed the upside, if there was an upside to COVID. It revealed, for example, that we depended on China for antibiotics like amoxicillin. Very basic, the pink stuff. The stuff you give your kids when they have an earache, or at least you used to give your kids when you had an earache. When my kids were little, you got the pink stuff and it was gone in a day. Now apparently docs are worried about that, so we don't do that anymore. But antibiotics. And President Trump brought it up in the Rose Garden yesterday. He said we can't have pharmaceuticals that we need produced in China. I don't know how the tariff structure is going to work. I believe that part of it at least, which is aimed at forcing people to choose sides in the Cold War 2.0 and a decoupling from China, is long overdue. Stephen Miller is the Deputy Assistant to the President and the Deputy Chief of Staff. He might be the Assistant to the President. I don't know the formal title. Stephen Miller gave 3 minutes and 13 seconds yesterday on what President Trump's Independence Day was all about. I want you to hear Miller explain it because it's the most concise, best explanation. So I played it in every hour. Cut number 15.
Can you talk about the president's historical view on global trade and the tool of tariffs or the use of tariffs that he envisions, not just through Liberation Day today, but how he's used it over the years?
Yes. Well, the announcement today is the most significant action on global trade policy that has taken place in our lifetimes. It's not even a close call. I mean, this is probably the biggest event that's happened on global trade since the very ill-fated decision that we are now reversing of knocking down all of America's trade tariffs and revenue policies that led to the offshoring and outsourcing of all of our industry. So this is the great reversal of that great betrayal, is how I look at it. So in the 20th century, successive American presidents knocked down all of the policies that we had to protect American industry, and they did insane things like letting China into the World Trade Organization, as an example. And we watched all of our factories go overseas. This is the complete reversal of that. This is the great onshoring, the great reshoring of American jobs and wealth. So if you look at America today, we're totally dependent on foreign countries for the supplies that make this country run, for all of the essential goods, materials, manufactured products that make it possible for us to live our lives. Our cars, our electronics, all the materials that go into our homes, our buildings, our medical supplies, our entire supply chains are completely embedded in foreign countries. So if there's a national emergency of any kind, and a country shuts off an import or a foreign power embargoes a sea lane, we are then left defenseless, helpless, because of the decisions that prior leaders made that President Trump is now reversing to let all of these industries leave our country. And so what he's doing today is, for the first time ever, he's saying that if you have stolen our jobs and therefore threatened our national security, we will apply a reciprocal tariff based on the degree of your misconduct. So for countries like China, for example, they will see a very high tariff rate because they've engaged in the most egregious conduct that threatens our national security. For countries that have severe but not as severe misconduct, they'll see a moderate but not as high tariff rate. The effect, though, of those global tariffs will be that companies will have to move their production back into the United States. So factories will leave, whether it be Mexico or Canada or Vietnam or Cambodia or China or the European Union. They will come back to the United States to produce their products, to make their goods. And in so doing, yes, it will create jobs. Yes, it will increase revenues. But most importantly, it will restore our national security so that we will not be dependent on anyone else to survive and thrive as a nation. That's the significance we're talking about today, the most important economic event of our lifetimes.
And Stephen,
It is the most important economic event of our lifetime. If your life is 30 years or younger. Most important economic event of our lifetimes was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the 2008 financial crisis was pretty bad. But in terms of Cold War 2.0, since the recognition that we are in Cold War 2.0, decoupling from China is the most important thing that we can do. Decoupling from China is without question the objective behind most of this. The highest tariff is going on China. Why is that? Because we have to get our supply chains out of China. They can go other places, but we're not going to be taking it on the chin because people know that we need our supply chains to move. We are going to be investigating. Now, I would not be surprised to see a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of different countries saying you got it wrong, or we're not manipulating our currency, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. I do have one simple question for Canada. Why can't Wisconsin export their dairy products into Canada? Oh, that's not free trade. I always thought that's what free trade was. It's sort of like in the United States, if I make something in Missouri, I can send it to Washington State or I can send it to Florida and no one's going to charge me anything. Free trade is what happens inside the United States and allegedly what happens inside the European Union. I've got no problem taking the gloves off with the European Union. None at all. Anyone who knows anything about the European Union knows they're trying to screw us, screw us, screw us. So I think getting real with the European Union, because we've been paying for their defense since 1945. And it's about time we stop subsidizing the European Union, especially when they regulate because they can't compete. However, if any of this hurts an American industry, I think Donald Trump will back off of it in a hurry, with the exception of, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, agriculture. When I come back, though, I'm going to have Andrew C. McCarthy on. I'm going to talk about the war by President Trump on big law. And I got thoughts. Big law is big law. It's different from normal law. Big law is law firms, let's call it 300 or more. And Donald Trump's making a list, and he's checking it twice, of the people who've been on the wrong side of history. And he doesn't want them in the federal government manipulating the rules and regulatory process. I am not sure of its constitutionality. You know, I'm most worried about with the tariffs are America's farmers, because what we export a lot of, we are the world's breadbasket. There are other people that export a lot of things, like Ukraine, big exporter of wheat and other grains. There are places that are fertile. America is one of them. Our farmers are amazing. We use genetically altered seeds and crops, and so we produce more of the best stuff. People like the EU screw us anyway, but Trump takes care of the farmer. Tim Sheehy is from Montana, new senator. He's on CNN with Pamela Brown yesterday, and he explains from a state that concerns itself with agriculture quite a lot. They send a lot of beef away. What is going on here in the trade wars? Cut number 14.
Long term, making life affordable for working class families again, making sure the blue collar jobs that are manufacturing, that bring industry back. I mean, look at our egg sector, for example. Our egg sector gets decimated by other countries tariffing our beef imports, our shrimp, our catfish. I mean, you have Asian nations dumping millions of pounds of shrimp, catfish, shellfish. Australia dumps beef into our market. They tariff us at up to 50% of our exported ag products and then dump mass-produced ag products into our market, severely harming our farmers and our ranchers. So it's about time we have a level playing field for our business. For businesses for a generation now, we've let the rest of the world take advantage of that. That has inflationary impacts as well.
Tim Sheehy, senator from Montana. I'll come back to that. We've caught up with Andrew C. McCarthy. Extraordinarily, one of the few people actually knows what he's talking about when he talks about prosecuting terrorists. But today, Andrew, I've got a completely different question for you. President Trump's war on big law. And I got to tell you, it's a case of first impression. I've told my con law students, I don't know if it's viewpoint non-neutrality or not. I'm not sure if it's constitutional or not. Would you first explain to people what big law is? I have my own view of what big law is, but what do you think it is?
Well, I think it's a loose description of the major litigation firms that those of us who are in the profession have known as the leading firms for since time immemorial. I can't really define it any better than that, Hugh, because the firms are different in terms of their size. Most of what we're talking about here are very big law firms that have international presence, not just national. And they have, they're not boutique-y, but they have sort of specialties. Like, for example, one of the firms, I think Wilmer Hale's a good example of this, Perkins Coie, another one. A lot of their work has to do with, national security stuff and defense contracting and that kind of thing. So that if you yank everybody's security clearances indiscriminately, you're essentially going to put them out of business. And I think what we're seeing, there's a lot of hue and cry about, the fact that some of them, like Skadden, the Skadden Arps, have settled with President Trump, even though I believe what he's doing, you talk about viewpoint discrimination, I think it's more like a bill of attainder.
Oh, interesting.
One way or the other. Yeah,
interesting.
And I wrote about this in connection with Perkins Coie a couple of weeks ago. I don't accept the counter argument that bills of attainder were legislative acts or parliamentary acts, because it's often made, that argument is made by people who spend the rest of their week complaining that the president has usurped Congress's legislative authority. So it seems to me to be a kind of a factitious distinction to stand on. But I think the reason that you're seeing some of these firms settle with the administration is they're starting to lose. They're not only losing clients, they're losing talent. They're losing lawyers because no matter whether you think what's being done to them is fair or unfair, if you're a big business who's got a problem with the government or some other kind of litigation problem, are you going to hire a firm that's under the government's microscope and is apt to be compromised in its ability to give you the full kind of representation you may need, especially if that involves things like, mundane things like going into government office buildings and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I want to add that if you're the general counsel of a publicly traded company and you've got to hire outside counsel for litigation or an M&A or any kind of a public offering or anything, you're going to look at the list that Trump puts out, and you're not going to hire someone on that list. That's why it's troubling to me on a First Amendment basis, because it's not really it's not personal. It's just business. We can't have someone who can't get into the FTC dealing with a complaint against us. But let me ask you this, Andy: big law has gone left. I managed to avoid big law. I was 6 years. Kept Gibson Dunn waiting at the door as I hid in the federal government until the bad years passed and I could go out and practice. I didn't want to do big law because big law was not. It's just not much. It's not as much fun as you had being an assistant United States attorney coming out of law school. If you go to big law, you just work in the back doing due diligence. It's miserable. But after Trump won, a bunch of Trump lawyers could not get jobs. I mean, literally could not go back to K Street or the firms that they came from because they were radioactive because of Trump. And I thought that was deeply unfair. But they're private sector, right? They can be prejudiced. How much of this is payback? How much of this is national security? How much of this is reminding big law that they better not be all left or all right, but they ought to be what they used to be, which was bipartisan?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is payback. And on the issue that you just raised, one of the things that I wrote about when I wrote about Perkins Coie is how much I hated this issue because it required me to come to the defense of these firms when there were people like I don't want to.
Let's not name anyone.
Discussion of people we both know.
Yeah.
But I remember not only those people who got their, they tried to get their license taken away from them. They tried to prosecute them, and they couldn't hire lawyers. And it doesn't seem like all that long ago to me when the lawyer left was lined up from Fifth Avenue to Guantanamo Bay to contribute gratis their skill set to jihadists who were trying to mass murder Americans. And under circumstances where that went on, but these people couldn't even get legal representation, and what the government was essentially trying to criminalize, and what other entities were trying to criminalize when they sued these guys, was basically frivolous legal theories. And I have to say, and I have said it a number of times, if a frivolous legal theory is now a felony, I could have indicted 6 a day when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's what lawyers do. And it never before was thought that creative lawyering, and defense lawyers were among the most creative people I ever encountered, that could be turned into a crime, and lawyers would be the ones who would turn their back on the people who were subjected to that. Is just it's mind-boggling.
I'm going to pick up this thread with Andy during the break, and I hope I can keep him after, because it's very complicated. It's not easy. It's a case of first impression. I've never seen anything like that. But big law has gone very far left in the 30, 40 years that Andy and I have been practicing, and I mean way left. And consequences or no consequences, I don't know. First impression. Andy, I don't know what the hiring practices are at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the United States. I never worked for a U.S. Attorney's Office. But at big law, they've gone left. Like the law faculties of America have gone left. And the law generally is going left. Is the American center right just supposed to say that it's too bad and not do anything in response? Before we get to Trump, just generally, should we pay attention to this?
No, I think it's unacceptable, and it's got it's got more of a damaging trajectory for the country than other industries going left. Because if you have two left-leaning firms and a left-leaning judge who are involved in litigation, you know how that's going to drift, and those cases create precedents that are applicable to everyone. So I think the current of this is more alarming, and has been for over a generation, than the leftward drift of other industries. And as far as Trump is concerned, I feel like this is maddening, because with all things Trump, you have to separate good from bad. There's never anything that lines up as one or the other, right? So I think much like Columbia surrendered to the administration, and I imagine other big universities will, I think a lot of these law firms that are in settlement talks or have made settlements with the government are doing that because they know that DEI, which Trump has made into a cause, and I'm glad that he has, they know it's toxic for them, it's terrible for them, it's bad for their business, and this gives them kind of cover to get rid of something they probably like to get rid of anyway, but they know the left would kill them.
Now, part one, and we'll come back in part two. What goes around comes around. The great Mitch McConnell warning Harry Reid, don't break the filibuster. You're going to be really upset. And he broke the filibuster, and sure enough, it came around. Shouldn't conservatives be afraid? Democrats will be back in the Oval. And whatever Donald Trump does, AOC can do when she's president.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest fear. And I know people are feeling their oats now. They kind of like this intimidating style of government. But, the difference between this and when the Democrats get in is that the media is whipped up about this. When the Democrats get in and do the same thing, when they put their brass knuckles on, the media is going to be the wind at their back. It's going to be much worse than even this.
Well, am I right, though, that just tell me about U.S. Attorney's Office. Have they begun to hire on ideology?
I think beginning in Obama, the government and certainly the law enforcement and intelligence apparatus made it a point to hire lefty radicals, and in particular on the civil side and the civil rights division at the Justice Department. And each U.S. Attorney's Office has a civil division and does civil rights stuff. So I think they purposely incepted left-wing ideologues into both the Main Justice and the U.S. Attorney's
Office. Oh, my gosh.
And the FBI.
That is such bad news. I'm talking with Andrew C. McCarthy. A brand new McCarthy report dropped today where Rich Lowry and Andy McCarthy are talking about President Trump's war on big law. And I'm previewing it. I haven't listened to it yet. I'll listen to it this afternoon when I'm done with the show and before I teach. Andy, what is your biggest constitutional concern with the big law? I don't know what to call it. It's a brawl. What Trump is doing, the president is doing something I've never seen done before. But I don't know what to make of it. What do you make of it constitutionally?
Well, I've seen it. I think we have seen it done before in a different iteration. And that is when the Obama and Biden administrations used the civil rights laws as a cudgel to get municipal, especially police departments, to sign consent agreements where they basically said they would do Obama policing rather than the policing we've known since the 1990s actually combats crime. So I think it was the same thing, except those guys were less crass about it, and they were operating under the cover of a 1994 statute that allowed the Attorney General to sue municipalities under pattern and practice civil rights investigations. And the problem with this, Hugh, is the Justice Department has a bottomless budget. I think it was $40 billion the last time around, maybe more than that. No municipality, not even the New York City Police Department, well, New York's a basket case financially anyway, but no municipality can go toe-to-toe with the Justice Department. So they all settle. And that's what this is. This is you take the muscle of the government and you push people into doing things that they would not otherwise do. And the thing about the consent decrees that always drove me up a wall is that if the government tried to do this by regulation, the Constitution would prevent it. But they look at consent decrees, and I think Trump will say these settlement agreements are just contracts. And you can agree to all kinds of stuff in a contract, and you can get people to agree to all kinds of stuff in a contract that you wouldn't be able to order them to do, because then the constitutional protections would kick in.
So, Andy, you remember the NCAA when it had teeth? They would threaten the death penalty. You know, SMU, you're out of football for 3. You could kill a university by doing that. Basically, the president is wielding that authority against these law firms. I don't like some of these law firms because they are highly ideological and they are anti-conservative. What's your counsel to the White House counsel at this point? Because I don't think this is going to stand up in court. I haven't even thought about the bill of attainder argument yet. I was just thinking First Amendment, they're being punished for what they said and did, and I'm not sure that's going to stand up, even if it's a consent decree. What's your advice to the White House counsel to do?
Well, I wouldn't do this because I think it's unconstitutional, and I also think it's just a bad thing to do, and it will redound to our detriment when the other side gets in because they'll triple down on it. But I have not been, as you've seen, I've not been famously successful at convincing them with my legal arguments. So I just hope they stop, because I think they're bruising for a bruising when a court finally grapples with this. They're in front of 3 judges now because some of the firms are fighting back. I don't think the Supreme Court is going to like this. And I think the cumulative effect of all of this is we have to get some very tough cases. We have to try to win them in the Supreme Court. You're not going to convince the court on the close ones that we need to win if you convey to them that you're cavalier about constitutional rights and due process.
That's a very good argument. That's a very good argument. Let me ask you about what is most important to get to the court first. I think it's the nationwide injunction case or something that raises that issue. What do you think is?
I agree. The nationwide injunction is massively important. The number of them now compare. I think the Trump administration's being edgy, so they're obviously inviting some of this stuff. But the number of these injunctions now has 4 or 5 times what it was just a short time ago. And the idea that a single district judge can make national policy should. Even Elena Kagan, I've heard complain about it.
No, I think it's actually undermining the rule of law when you can do this, and I'm hoping that the court sees the same way and that they move pretty quickly on this. Andrew C. McCarthy, thank you. I'm going to go listen to the McCarthy Report as I drive home today. Everyone should like and subscribe to Rich Lowry. If you can get past the Mets and the Yankees talk, which, if you're a Guardians fan, I have to put up with it every single episode. But if you can get past the Mets and the Yankees talk, it's a great podcast that explains for laymen and lawyers exactly what's going on in the courts, because Andy and Rich are pretty good at what they do. Thank you, Andrew C. McCarthy. Don't go anywhere, America. Talk with Jim Talent next about the forces amassing off the coast of Iran. Jim Talent was senator from Missouri. He is chairman of the Reagan Institute's Leadership Council, and he's an expert on national defense matters. Jim, I brought this up with Senator Cotton today. I brought it up in a Fox News column I wrote. The United States is deploying in and near Iran, or within range of Iran, more firepower than I've seen concentrated since the invasion of Iraq in 2004 and Desert One. I mean, we've got a lot of stuff near Iran, and we got the stealth bombers at Diego Garcia. What do you think is going on here?
I think we're building up to attack unless Iran makes some move to indicate that they're going to break down their nuclear infrastructure. I mean, in addition to what you said, of course, we are hitting the Houthis very hard, which is not only important in terms of constraining the Houthis, but is also sending a message. And of course, the president has been very direct and very clear that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. And the two worst things that could happen in the world that are foreseeable. I mean, it's not like that aren't like a meteor hitting the earth. The two worst things would be for China to attempt a blockade or an invasion of Taiwan, or for Iran to get a nuclear weapon and the ability to deliver it. So it looks like the administration's serious, and I'm glad to see it.
So, Senator, I have not been able to discern a time frame on the. You've got two options, the easy way and the hard way offer that Donald Trump made to the Ayatollah Khamenei. Do you have a time frame in mind for when Iran passes that red line?
Yeah, that's so hard to figure, because I haven't seen the president say anything regarding a time frame. But when you build up like this, let's take the B-2s. I mean, they're really not supposed to remain for a long period of time at some place like Diego Garcia. They're difficult to maintain and expensive to maintain. So if you're moving them in, it indicates you're not looking at a long-term type of thing. So I don't know. Unless the president says something, I don't think any of us are going to be able to figure it. But they're building up to something, and they can't keep two carriers in the Gulf forever either.
No,
I mean it's it's a substantial deployment of American forces.
Now, I asked Senator Cotton, and he demurred because he can't remember what he learned in a classified setting and what he learned from open source. So I'm hoping you don't have the same problem. How many sites are we talking about in Iran that are critical to their nuclear weapons program?
I think it depends on how broadly you define criticality. I mean, for example, the sites that are actually isolating the high volume uranium, probably from an open source perspective, a half a dozen. But then there's also the ballistic missile production sites. So I think it depends on how broadly you define it. Now, a lot of this stuff is buried. Even the big bombs may not be able to get down and get them, but we can close up the entrances and exits to those kinds of facilities. I think if they go, they're going to go big. There's no reason to try and do this in too targeted a way. I think they'll hit everything, and because if you're going to go, you might as well do it. I mean, the Iranians will respond in any way they can, probably with attempts activating cells and attempts at overseas attacks. But as I said, this is the number one priority concern in the Middle East, and it's time to deal with it.
It also would, if they got to break out, it would mean Saudi Arabia and others would have to develop a nuclear capability. It's a nightmare situation. Yeah. What about second order impacts? You mentioned terrorist attacks from sleeper cells. Are you at all concerned that Iran can cripple any of our infrastructure via cyber attacks?
They have some cyber capabilities, but again, if they're giving us time to build up and giving us time to plan. Our cyber command is very effective, so they'll be ready with defensive maneuvers and also to take out their capacity to attack us. And you're right, by the way, about one of the reasons it would be so bad if Iran got a nuclear weapon is it would probably cause a nuclear cascade in the Middle East, and we'll see a multipolar nuclear Middle East, and then the possibility of an exchange goes way up. I mean, the Saudis could probably just buy the weapon if they wanted to, go to Pakistan or something like that.
Would we be acting alone in a strike on Iran, in your opinion, Jim Talent, Senator? Would Britain come along?
Well, I would not expect that the British would participate in that, and I don't think we need them. I mean, obviously, we'd be doing it with Israel. I would expect that Israel would move in first with the first day of the war missions and take out what's left of Iran's anti-aircraft capabilities. And then we would move in with the heavy bombers, which is what they really need, as you know. I mean, Israel's got everything else. So
last question.
Would
would we take out their refineries at the same time? Because that's sort of a move towards regime change, because it means they're crippled economically as well as in their nuclear capacity, and they've already lost their proxies. Do you think we'd hit the refineries?
Well, of course we could, but I would expect that if the refineries get hit, it'll be done as a result of a gradual or layered escalation by the United States. I mean, if the president doesn't want to hit nuclear infrastructure right away, he could go after, for example, the spy ships, the logistics, and support for groups like the Houthis. He could hit civilian infrastructure like the refineries or the ports. That would be another level of escalation. Or he could go right to the nuclear infrastructure. Part of what we don't know is how serious President Trump would be about actually trying to negotiate with Iran. I think Dr. Oren brought that up with you in an interview. And if he does that, he's going to have to be very careful, because the Iranians will agree to something and then violate the agreement. We've seen that before. But no,
they'd have to open every door. They'd have to open up every door in a way that you and I would be satisfied there really is verification. And they didn't do that under the JCPOA. In fact, if I can keep you through the break, don't go anywhere, Jim Talent. I want to talk to you during the break so you can explain to people. The JCPOA was a nightmare because it had the appearance of an agreement, and it wasn't an agreement. It was a facade, and maybe the worst thing the United States has done since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Senator, when the JCPOA was signed, the worst thing was it purported to have verification in it, but then I read the small print, and they took entire parts of Iran off the verifiable map. Do you think Trump would fall for anything like that?
Well, Donald Trump's a pretty good negotiator. I think we're seeing that right now in the way he's handling the Ukrainian negotiations. And I don't want to hijack the thread by going off into that. So no, I would not expect it. You're right. They did not ever tell us all the various parts of the infrastructure that they had. In other words, they never gave a baseline for the facilities that they had operating. So of course, they had a lot of them that were operating in the dark zone that they never told us about. And so that couldn't be inspected. In addition, they would deny entrance to the inspectors or require notice before they gave them entrance. And then they cheated. They operated the centrifuges anyway, which is why they are now pretty close to getting a bomb, where they could break out and get it pretty quickly. Now, whether they have the capability to deliver it or not, that's something Senator Cotton would probably know from being briefed. I think there's a question mark as to that, but they're close. And if they decide to drive for it, they can get a weapon with an ICBM pretty quickly.
Last question, Senator. That's sort of second stage deployability. If they can get a nuclear device, they can drive it to Israel. I keep telling people, put it on a semi and drive it there. It's not like they have to have what we have. Am I right about that, or am I alarmist?
No, you can do. I mean, nuclear terrorism has been a concern for a long time. I mean, people have been concerned that, and there are actually rings to try and purchase this material. Pakistan has been a real danger, so they could do that. But in terms of the full danger of it, the full operational use of it, generally, they're going to need missiles to do that. They're going to need delivery systems to do that. They could infiltrate with a small weapon.
That's one of my nightmares, but hopefully we don't get there. Senator Jim Talent, good to talk to you. Follow him on X at Jim Talent, the easiest X handle in America, Jim Talent, and the one you should be following. Thank you, Senator. I'll be right back. We've been covering a bunch of stuff, and the most important thing is not the tariffs. The most important thing is not Donald Trump's offensive against big law. It's not the tax bill. The most important thing is that Iran not get breakout to a nuclear weapon. That's been the most important thing. The disaster years of the Obama administration, when we let children devise America's policy towards Iran, it's the worst thing that happened since the 1979 revolution. Now they're very close. And Donald Trump has said to them, either you open up and denuclearize and demystify and be transparent, or the bombs will fall. And we are well positioned. Jim Talent just made a point, which I hadn't thought about. We do not want our strategic assets collected in one place, the B-2s, for very long. That's not smart with China and hypersonic missiles. It's expensive to have the carrier. We're not talking about a long time here. Iran, if they want to get right with the world, if they want to stand down, having gotten blasted by Israel twice and seen all their proxies blown up, the time is now to really, no matter what your crazy parliamentarians are saying that are being quoted at the Institute for the Study of War, which I read every day, stop saying that stuff and just declare we're out of the game, like Libya did. Libya showed the way. You want to get out of harm's way, you can tell America that you're out of the game. Don't forget, if you missed anything on a very jam-packed show today, the key interviews and the key monologue are all at my YouTube channel, Hugh Hewitt. I would appreciate it very much if you would like and subscribe to it so we can spread the word, or listen to the podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh.